My family crossed the Sahara Desert twice in the 1970s, driving in between the UK and Nigeria. And I have fond childhood memories of driving, of the sand, of sleeping out under the stars at night. And as we approached our trip in 1992 across Africa, crossing the desert was definitely going to be the highlight for me. It was something I was really looking forward to and wanted to do strongly. But the situation in the 1970s was dramatically different to the situation in 1992. We were already aware of this as we were planning the trip through 1991 and into 92, and we were hearing stories of what was happening in the desert. We knew that the Tuareg peoples who crossed several borders of the Sahara were in rebellion. We knew that there was war going on. We knew that they were fighting for an autonomous region of their own. And we knew that the internal borders at various times had been closed. As we left England, we'd heard that the border between Algeria and Niger was closed. So as we talked and we prayed, we knew that driving across the Sahara may not physically be possible. But we prayed about it, we talked about it, we counted the cost in the UK, and we felt we should press ahead with faith, trusting that the door would open up as we went. I remember a verse that we were repeatedly given along the theme of Joshua and Caleb was the verse where Joshua is told to be strong and courageous, that the Lord, his God, is with him wherever he goes. And that phrase, the Lord your God is with you wherever you go, was kind of a ringing in our minds, I suppose, as we left England. But now we found ourselves camping in the mountains outside Algiers. It was October 1992. We spent actually 10 days camping in the mountains, driving down into the city in the daytime, trying to get visas for onward travel. Several times in those days we visited 2 different embassies to ask advice, to find out if they knew which borders may or may not be open, and to find out what the latest situation was. Just as we were preparing to finally set off across the desert, 2 of the team went into their embassy, and as they spoke to the consular staff, they were given an extremely bleak picture. They were basically told in no uncertain terms, do not cross the desert. And if you do this and die, we are not coming in to get your bodies. We were told that the situation was getting worse every day. People believed civil war was imminent. Many of the non-essential family staff were being evacuated from all of the embassies in Algiers. We heard that a German had just been shot at a roadblock for refusing to stop. The situation was getting worse. The fear and the tension in the city of Algiers was palpable. There were police at every single junction. We were stopped many times every day whenever we drove down into the city. And every time there were police with AK-47s leaning in the window. There was a tension in the air. So, as we faced this reality, we really were coming to a junction where we had to make a decision. Were we going to continue south against the immediate advice of the embassy, or were we going to drive west into Morocco? The choice really was fairly stark. We either try to cross the Sahara or we head west and look for an alternative route, either trying to drive south from Morocco down through Western Sahara and Mauritania and then around the bulge of West Africa, or we drive to a big port city like Casablanca and try to find a ship to put the Land Rovers on and ship them around to West Africa, and then we would have to find an alternative route for ourselves. As we faced this choice, we didn't know what to do. We drove down into a quiet area outside the city, and we spent 3 hours talking and praying. It was actually an awesome, awe-inspiring, awesome time of prayer. We faced our fears. We talked honestly with each other. We counted the cost. And I remember very strongly that we moved as a team as we talked and prayed together. We moved until we came to the point where all 8 of us counted the cost and essentially were ready to drive south and cross the desert. But at the same time, possibly the 4 or the 5 people in the team who had started off with probably the strongest desire to cross the desert and the strongest attitude, we can do this, actually ended up being the ones who initially said, no, actually, it feels like we should drive into Morocco. It was an interesting process. I feel now, looking back, that I was learning something at the time, that there wasn't necessarily a right or wrong way, as if God had one route that we had to discover. As we prayed, I realised that the significant thing was that we loved each other, was that as a team we preferred each other, that we put each other before our own ambitions and our own desires and our own romantic sense of what this trip should look like. It almost felt as if God had no necessarily right or wrong way for us to go, that we genuinely had a choice ahead of us. And that verse in Joshua came back to me. Be strong and courageous. The Lord your God is with you wherever you go. It almost came across with a question mark. Wherever we go, whichever way we choose, God is with us. There may be consequences in the choice that we make, but God is with us. We can make this choice. And so as we made that choice there in the field, we decided that we would head into Morocco. It was a moment of disappointment, coming to terms with the fact that this romantic dream I had wasn't going to happen. I wasn't going to cross the desert. It was a time of deciding we need to stick together on this one. We need to come to a place of peace and unity. It was a time of recognising that we could choose the more adventurous, in our minds possibly heroic, certainly foolish route. We could push ahead feeling that this was the thing to do in faith, but actually not be loving each other. Far more important, it felt, to choose a way that was loving and submitting and putting each other first. And so we chose to drive into Morocco. And over the coming days, we did that. We started heading west. Interestingly, as we got back into our Land Rovers, we discovered that one of the guys didn't have his wallet. Couldn't find it. We searched frantically everywhere for this wallet, and then finally we realised it was lost. It was gone. Sadly, inside his wallet, he had his passport with his Algerian visa and 5 onward-going visas, £1,000 worth of travellers' checks, £200 in cash, his driver's licence. There was no way we could move on to Morocco without this wallet. We moved back to the mountains. We set up our tents again, and the next day he and I headed back down into the city to the British Embassy. We headed to the police station. We needed a police report. Miraculously, that day, we managed to get an emergency British passport issued. We got a police report for our insurance. We even managed to get a new Algerian visa issued in 15 minutes. We got a Malian visa also issued in 15 minutes. Miraculous. Amazing. We headed back to camp that night, exhilarated at the provision. The next day, we drove back down into the city again, and surprisingly, we were flagged down by a youth. We wouldn't normally have stopped because of the tension in the air, but we stopped. Amazingly, he asked if we had lost a passport. We said yes. He said, wait here. He ran off to his house. He came back 10 minutes later with the passport and the wallet and everything inside it apart from the £200 cash. And we had this surreal experience of quite miraculous answers to prayer the previous day, emergency passports, and now we've got the passport back. We had this strange experience of going back to the British Embassy and saying, oh, we've got the passport back. And they had to annul the emergency passport. The next day, after 10 days staying in the mountains, we headed off towards Morocco. I guess at that point I was learning something of the need to be flexible, the need to not hold on too rigidly to plans and to dates, but to be flexible, to be willing to move with the trip, not to have a strong, rigid idea of what would or wouldn't happen. Interestingly, when we crossed over into Morocco, we actually needed to leave our vehicles at the border and hitchhike into the nearest town to buy car insurance, and then come back to the border to pick up our Land Rovers to continue. And to our amazement, we were picked up. 2 of us were picked up by a German and a Moroccan woman, and the German was actually the brother of the German who had been killed a few days earlier in Algeria. So we heard firsthand of just how dangerous it was. As we continued in the following days in Morocco, we heard more and more stories of people managing to get out of Algeria. We heard that the border into Morocco was closing, that people were not being allowed to enter from Morocco into Algeria. We had experienced the palpable fear and tension. We'd experienced that firsthand, but now we were hearing of what was happening in the country. And civil war broke out in the days while we were in Morocco. And in the months ahead, 200,000 people died in the war. It was an interesting season for me and for us as a team to be learning not to hold on too rigidly to plans, to be learning that there wasn't always necessarily a right or a wrong. It wasn't as if choosing one way was lacking in faith and choosing another way was faith. Actually, choosing to love, choosing to put each other first was the significant thing. So, it's rare since then that I've been in such moments of having to make decisions that potentially had life and death consequences. Since then, I've certainly been involved in situations where people have made choices that have led to very dangerous consequences. And so I recognise now the significance of these moments. But I realise as well that even in the smaller decisions we're making, there isn't always a right or a wrong. There isn't always one way that we have to find, especially in team or in family. It feels like often the significant thing is submitting to each other, loving each other, peacefully coming to a place of common agreement where we can move forward in consensus, committing to each other not to hold on to disappointment, choosing to love and to choose a higher way.